Great. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm Jen Dentel from Gerber Library and Archives, and welcome to our virtual author talk. I'm very excited to welcome authors and Chicago LGBT Hall of Fame members Yvonne Zipter and Gregg Shapiro, along with our moderator, Carrie Barnett. So Gerber is an LGBTQ library and archives located up in the Rogers Park neighborhood in Chicago. We've been around since 1981, and our collections focus on the LGBTQ history of Chicago and the Midwest. And part of that history includes our archives, and we're very fortunate to have the archival collections of Yvonne, Gregg, and Carrie, including the entire People Like Us books collection in our archives. I'm very excited to introduce our authors and our moderator, Carrie Barnett. Gregg and Yvonne will both be doing a short reading from their latest books, followed by a moderated discussion and then an audience Q&A. Both of the books are available for purchase from Rattling Good Yarns Press, so I have left a link for that in the chat box, so just check there. So Gregg Shapiro is the author of 7 books, including the expanded edition of his short story collection, How to Whistle, which he'll be reading from today. Recent and forthcoming literary magazine titles include Exquisite Pandemic, RFD, Gargoyle, Limp Wrist, Molly House, Impossible Archetype, Wards, and Dissonance magazine, as well as the anthologies Moving Images, Poems Inspired by Film, This Is What America Looks Like, and Sweeter Voices Still, an LGBTQ anthology from Middle America. An entertainment journalist whose interviews and reviews run on a variety of LGBTQ+ and mainstream websites and publications. Shapiro lives in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with his husband Rick and their dog Coco, who might be making an appearance. Yvonne Zipter is the author of the Russian historical novel Infraction, which she'll be reading from tonight. The poetry collections Kissing the Long Face of the Greyhound, The Patience of Metal, and Like Some Bookie God, as well as 2 nonfiction books, including the incredible Diamonds Are a Dyke's Best Friend about lesbians in softball, and Ransacking the Closet. Her poems have appeared in numerous periodicals over the years, and currently published poems are being sold individually in Chicago in 2 vending machines to help raise money for the nonprofit arts organization Arts Alive Chicago. So if you've been to Women and Children First or Eris Cidery recently, you might have seen the machines. She was inducted into the Chicago LGBT Hall of Fame in 1995, and she's retired from the University of Chicago Press, where she was a manuscripts editor. And finally, our moderator, Carrie Barnett. Carrie was active in the Chicago queer community from 1988 to 2018. She co-owned People Like Us Books, which was Chicago's only exclusively LGBT bookstore from 1988 to 1997. Her involvement in the community grew from the bookstore's presence, and it included multiple terms on the board of Gerber, including in the 1990s, and then again in the 2010s as well. So she was part of the team that helped open when we moved from the Granville to the Clark Street location. Carrie was inducted into the Chicago LGBT Hall of Fame as an individual in 1998, and for her business People Like Us Books in 2017. She lives in Columbia, Missouri, where she continues to work at her virtual software company. All right, so again, Gregg and Yvonne's books are both available for purchase, so from Rattling Good Yarns Press, so check the chat for that. We're gonna start off with a short reading from Gregg, who'll then hand it off to Yvonne before our moderated discussion and Q&A. So again, if you do have questions for our authors, please just drop them in the chat or mention that you wanna ask your question live. So that's the end of my spiel. Go ahead and take it away, Gregg.
Hi, y'all. Thanks for coming. Very quickly, thanks to Jen and Will and all at Gerber Library. Thanks to Yvonne and Carrie, to Ian at Rattling Good Yarns Press, and to all attending. So I'm going to read a story from How to Whistle. This is a story called A Different Deborah. Deborah, when I first met you, you liked women. You had a girlfriend named Patty who lived in the city in the narrow cigarette pack house on Montana. Her father was a Chicago cop and he disapproved. She was tough and intimidating the way you imagine the teenage lesbian daughter of a cop would be. She was the last remnant of your urban life. Here's the excuse your newly widowed mother used to move you and your 3 younger sisters out of the house you grew up in near the intersection of Ashland and Pratt in East Rogers Park into a suburban townhouse that was half the size overlooking Jamaican Gardens and the Edens Expressway. The old neighborhood was becoming unsafe. What she meant by that was that while the old house was in disrepair and your father's meager life insurance policy paid for his funeral and burial at Calvary Cemetery and not much else, and there was evidence of migration of families from the south side to the north side, and there were muggings and other crimes being perpetrated. What she meant was that she thought it was dangerous, the way Patty snuck in and out of your first floor bedroom window at all hours of the night and day, never using the front door ever. Skokie was too much for us. We ran to the city any way we could, by bus, the number 97 or the 151 or 36, or train, the Skokie Swift to the Howard L. But my car, a crumbling, bright blue Plymouth Gold Duster, couldn't be trusted. When it worked, we'd fly down Lakeshore Drive, twist and roll on Sheridan Road and Broadway, or descend Clark Street from its Chicago Avenue route in Evanston. The radio was our soundtrack, our backing band. The hippie DJs at WXRT almost never played the new wave we craved, but occasionally they would shock us with something by Elvis Costello, the Ramones, Blondie, Talking Heads, The Clash, or Television. We rolled the windows down and howled our anthems to the moon. We never listened to WLUP, The Loop, because Styx and the Doobie Brothers and Foreigner made us want to drive into oncoming traffic, straight into Lake Michigan. We hated Martin. Maybe that's too strong a word. We couldn't figure out why Martin was in love with me. Stumped, I say. He was so physically hot that he had those mirage waves, the kind you sometimes see on the street in the summer all around him. His curly hair shimmered, and his Roman nose, his deep dimples and cleft chin begged to be incorporated into every kiss. Martin was a dancer. His body said what his mouth fell dumb to, what his hands couldn't spell. We alternated dancing vertically and horizontally. His sinewy arms and broad shoulders, muscular legs and firm pecs and tight, flat stomach, smooth and solid butt were meant to be a motion, never at rest, leaping through the air, in and out of the front seat of my car, zipping and buttoning his jeans as he went. His awkwardness, however, wasn't a mirage. He should have been chasing after attainable boys in his own age, attractiveness, and physical appearance bracket. We devoted hours to calculating and debating what you could possibly see in a skinny, moody, indecisive punk rock guy like me. We came up empty-handed. The night I met you, Deborah, it was August and cool. We were on either side of the bookstore counter. I worked days as an assistant branch manager at the Bank of Skokie, and nights I manned the cash register at the magazine rack in the strip mall next to the train station. It kept me out of and away from my parents' house where I was doing penance for quitting college. You were part of Steve and Gordy's shadow. They forgot to introduce us that night, so I reached out a hand and said my name. You grasped it and said, enchanted, and I was. They had just picked you up from work, Edwards in Old Orchard, where you waited tables for tips and minimum wage and wrote poems on napkins and the backs of order pads. You looked like trouble, and I was looking for trouble. I was an object of desire that brutal summer. Martin took care of business with Steve and Gordy and the boys outside. No use upsetting me, fragile as I was. I was his. He would never come between you and me. We talked incessantly about books and writers. We were poets. We knew how to make words jerk and snap, vibrate, or stand perfectly still. We all danced, clumsy, unchoreographed, with abandon, exposing ourselves without ever getting undressed. Every night began and ended in men's bars where you sometimes weren't welcome, given the third degree by the bouncer. Do you know what kind of bar this is? Do you have 6 more forms of ID? Once inside, we'd find my friends who adored you, craved the sound of your voice, your laugh, devoured your smile like a drug. Every song was declared our favorite, and we danced to all of them. Disco demolition be damned. We loved the nightlife and the disco round. Each dance was a slow dance when you and Patty danced together on the illuminated on the illuminated or wood parquet tiled or slippery linoleum dance floors of the various nightclubs we frequented. Beats per minute slowed to a crawl. Everyone around you jumped and bumped, stepped and leapt, kicked their heels and flicked their wrists, but the two of you never ceased the slow-mo torso grind, the dance step you claimed to have invented. Drenched in our own fluids, we rested just long enough to regain our strength, filing onto the dance floor, renewed and vital. Do you remember how you saved my life one night, Deborah? You sat hunched and fetal in the front seat of my car in the parking lot of Charlie's Angels. Forcing yourself to cry, you looked desperate, suicidal, so I wouldn't have to go home with the two men I'd met at a party. We drove away, doubled over in spasms of laughter and relief. Imagine me, 1/3 of a threesome. Secretly, it was the summer of Gacy. Secretly, I imagined them killing me, burying me in a crawl space, sealing me in a wall of their house. When you visited me in Providence, where I moved to return to college, you seemed changed. By then, you and Patty had broken up for a few months. The reasons are vague, the details not forthcoming. You got a job at Bank of Skokie on my recommendation. When we talked about the staff, laughing and making fun of the same people, you kept dropping the name of one of the loan officers. You didn't laugh. Sure, I remember him. Yes, he was handsome in his dark three-piece suits and polished shoes, his dark blonde hair and thick mustache, his large class ring glistening in the fluorescent light of the lobby, his red Camaro parked in the same spot of the parking lot every season during banking hours. A year later, when the wedding invitation arrived, I wasn't surprised. I knew that people changed like the weather, but I missed the other Deborah, the one who admirably exercised control with patchouli, the Deborah who fell partway into a sewer the day we went to say goodbye to Martin before I moved away, losing one platform clog, but gaining a tetanus shot. The one who smoked Eve menthol cigarettes all the way to the filter. The Deborah who alphabetized and itemized what it was that women did together in bed, solving a mystery I would have rather left uncovered. The one who wanted to go out dancing every night during her first and only visit to Providence to see how things compared to Chicago. I had no choice but to accept the fact that that Deborah was gone for good. I held the proof in my hands. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to call you and ask you what happened to the other Deborah, where she went, if she was ever coming back. It took every cell of my dignity not to ask you if you had invited Martin to the wedding too. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg, and thank you, Carrie and Jen and Will and everyone at Gerber Hart. Happy Pride Month. I'm going to read from Chapter 5 of Infraction, and I need to fill in a couple little details. At this point in the story, Maria and Vera, our two heroines, have just recently met. Reference is made at the start of the chapter to gatherings that Maria's aunt has convened to try to find Maria a husband. Also referenced are the Allerchine courses, which were a series of lectures designed by the Russian government to placate women who at that time were not allowed to attend universities. Not for the first time, Maria reflected that the men who attended the gatherings Lydia had designed for her were to a one bores. The mere thought of their inexhaustible blather, which they delivered as though what they had to say was of great import, caused Maria to vow that when next they assembled she would remind the whole pack of louts that rope is good when it's long, while speech is better when it's short. Irrespective of Maria's irritation with these foolish salons, she recognized that she owed a debt of gratitude to Lydia, for it was the fatuity of the gatherings that had stirred her to explore the Allerchine courses. Further, had she not gone to the Allerchine school, she would likely never have met Vera Dashkova, whose comely demeanor had stirred her at the outset, despite her reticence to give her heart again after having had it broken so recently. But how resist those eyes, blue as the Gulf of Finland in June, cheekbones of architectural majesty, hair the color of a wheat field in autumn? How indeed? But Maria did try to resist. Once she had greeted the woman in the seat beside her in the lecture hall, she thought there was an end to it. She had set her focus to Goncharov's lecture on anatomy. But then the ghostly touch of another's gaze would trail across the flesh of her neck, compelling her to turn toward that illusory caress. Upon finding its source each time, Maria couldn't prevent her face melting into a smile. In the days that followed that first encounter, Maria tried to distract herself from the thought of Vera, lest she let herself cross into territory she wished to avoid. But each book she tried to read, whether Ryman's Basis for a General Theory of Function or Turgenev's Smoke, fell slowly into her lap, the pages obscured by the vision of the girl's face filling her mind. Even to hold a conversation with her aunt proved a challenge, as she felt again, in memory, the feathered glance of scrutiny from those icy blue eyes. By the evening of the next lecture at the Allerton School, Maria could think of nothing but seeing Vera again. She attempted to fool herself into believing it was the anticipation of gaining further education that had her excited. But the multiple changes of gown, the desire to achieve precisely the right effect, belied her true interest. Though no doubt Lydia would have found every one of Maria's gowns as dreary as the next, for Maria each portrayed her in a shade different light. This one serious, that one solemn, a third stern, and another sincere. In the end, she settled on a black skirt, white shirt with stiff collar, and narrow black tie. Though she took special care with her hair as well, in the end she was dissatisfied and ran her fingers through it and wouldn't let herself examine it again. For by then she had all but convinced herself that likely Maria wouldn't appear again anyway, and further, that Vera's presence or absence would be of no interest to her regardless. But the moment Maria saw Vera beside the Allerton Bridge that evening, her heart leapt, and her wish for indifference had become a futility. Vera, peering down Angliski Avenue, didn't notice Maria on the bridge. Maria stood, hands in the pockets of her pea coat, attempting to decide whether to risk the pain of loss again, or whether it would be better to bypass Vera altogether and find a place in the lecture hall, far from her, off in a corner where she might go unnoticed. She chewed her lip, trying to ignore the sensation of pleasure she got simply from gazing at this woman who had, last time, smiled at her so kindly and with whom she had conversed so amiably. The faint odor of water and decay drifted up from the Ekaterinsky Canal as on the damp evening air, and she brushed rapidly at the sleeves of her jacket as if she might whisk away any trace of deterioration. Then she ran her fingers through her hair, and with a smile unstoppably blooming on her face, approached Vera. "Good evening, Vera Dashkova." "Oh, you startled me." Vera raised her gloved hand to her collarbone to form a V at the base of her neck. Maria thought fleetingly of how those fingers, thus arrayed, resembled the symbol for vector space. How like arrows Vera's forefinger and thumb were, and how they might describe the sum of the forces at work, as her gaze fell into the hollow that dipped between the fine bones that crowned Vera's chest. Vera's hand closed more closely around her neck in an unconscious gesture against the intensity of Maria's fixed stare. Vera cleared her throat. Good evening, Maria." Her gaze dropped to the muddy road. "Shall we go in?" Maria gestured toward the door. Vera nodded assent and took the arm Maria offered. The two women found a place in the lecture hall among the many others. There were women of every class and manner of dress, but Maria was aware only of Vera. Her skin tingled with the nearness of Vera, causing an involuntary shudder. Normally, a phrase such as numerical sequence would have pulled her attention like a charged particle to the speaker of those words. But the faint fragrance of lilacs emanating from Vera exerted a far greater pull. And though Maria's eyes were, for the most part, dutifully fixed on the man delivering that evening's lecture, she hardly noticed the long tresses that sprang frenziedly from his receding hairline, or the generous beard that rambled from his chin, or the rough cut of his coarse-looking jacket. And in those moments when the sensation of finding Vera so near to her that she was overpowered, Maria would chance a look as if to reassure herself she had not conjured a phantom to appease her longings. And if their eyes happened to meet, Maria was unable to suppress a glad smile. The color would then rise across Vera's cheeks, and immediately she would avert her eyes. So distracted were Vera and Maria on that evening, they would perhaps have been unaware that the lecture had concluded, if not for those around them rising to their feet and collecting their things. Maria cleared her throat and opened her mouth to speak, but Vera looked away shyly. They walked in silence to the door, though Maria's thoughts were anything but quiet. She didn't know what Vera might be feeling, but she understood all too well her own feelings. Again, Maria struggled with whether to hold herself safe from harm and say good night as they exited the door, or relent to the insistent prodding of her yearnings. The crowd of eager students dispersed along Angliski and Ekaterongofsky avenues and across the Allerchine Bridge as Maria and Vera stepped out into the brisk November night. Maria could not bear simply to turn her heart away from Vera, and so devised on the spot a test. She would offer Vera her hand to shake. If Vera seemed to disdain this gesture as too masculine, then the decision would be made for her. As Maria reached her hand out, she felt as though the very blood in her veins fell still, waiting. Vera reached with hesitation for Maria's hand. Maria squeezed Vera's hand lightly, thinking, "I can't bear this torment again." She did not wait for a response, but said, "Goodbye then." With that, she turned to walk away. "Maria," Vera called out. Maria pressed her eyes shut against the pain of hearing her name on Vera's lips. Certain she should walk away, Maria turned anyway to Vera, telling herself it would be discourteous not to hear what she might say. That is to say," Vera began, "would you care to come back to my room for some tea?" She pulled her lower lip between her teeth and pierced Maria with her eyes as though she meant to consider Maria as a specimen for her Kunstkammer, her cabinet of curiosities. "Thank you, Vera, for your kind invitation," Maria bowed, fully intending to decline, but heard herself say instead, "Yes, I should very much like that." Then, before she should regain her reason, Maria hailed a coachman. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both for that. I just wanted, before we go into the moderated discussion, if you do have questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or if you want to ask them live, just type that there in the chat box. Also, we had a bit of an issue with videos being enabled at the beginning. If you do want to turn your video on, you should be able to do that now. So if you want to do that, no pressure, but go ahead. So Carrie, take it away.
All right, yeah, we want to see your bright and shining faces. Hello, Kathy Ford, who I haven't seen in a million years. Hi, thanks for coming. Before we get down into the deep questions, I wanted to give another shout out to the publisher, Rattling Good Yarns Press, I was on their website today looking for like pithy things to say about them, but I found something that they wrote that I really liked, and it says LGBTQ fiction, history, and whimsy. And who doesn't like whimsy? So I wanted to thank them and tell you that one of the publishers, Suki Delacroix, is a former Gerber Hart board member. So that's kind of interesting, Gerber Hart nerdy things. And his husband, Ian Hensel, is the other publisher. So they have a bunch of good books, so you should go check them out. And then before I get into the other questions, I wanted to just tell you a couple of things about Yvonne and Gregg, because I've known them a minute, right? And I wanted to point out that Yvonne was the poet laureate of People Like Us books. And as she reminded me earlier, she has a certificate to prove it, which I'm pretty sure Brett Shingledecker must have made for her. So I don't know why you're not displaying it, Yvonne. And the other thing I wanted to tell you about Yvonne is she's written this column for the paper, and I love to read it every week. And I read it. And one of my favorite ones, and Yvonne, I bet you'll remember this, is one about the language of what we call our partners, because back then there was, less useful language, I guess, or less well understood language. And my favorite thing was that she decided that that should be boon companion. So that was like my favorite column you ever wrote. I don't know why I still remember it, but I do. So you could probably already see all of those articles and columns at Gerber Hart as well. And then Gregg, I don't know, I was thinking about what to say about Gregg, and I wanted to say that while we're all family, Gregg is actually in my immediate family. And that's all I have to say. I'm a little nervous. Can you tell I'm a little nervous? And I want you to know that while I've met a few authors over the years and hosted a few readings, for tonight, just consider me a curious reader now, like you. So Gregg, I'm starting with you. You ready?
I'm unmuted and ready.
You're ready. So this book, it's an extended edition from an earlier edition of it. Over what period of time did you write the stories in it, including the parts in the extended?
Well, some of the earliest stories were actually written in stone, some in parchment. They go way back. I mean, they go back to, I always think like one of the stories was published in Christopher Street, which has been gone for a very, very long time. So they cover, I would say they were probably written beginning in the, because I was a poet for so long before I switch teams or play on both teams. So I'm one of those.
Do you
I
now?
play for both, just in terms of words. But so I guess I would say 90, starting probably in the early to mid 90s.
Are there other stories that didn't make the book?
No, in fact, as of right now, all the ancient stories are all either in this or Lincoln Avenue. I haven't told Ian yet, and thank goodness he's not here, but I'm actually putting together another book of prose that's going to be a combination of newer short stories, and I've been writing a lot of personal essays, creative nonfiction. So I want all that prose under one cover. That's
awesome. Yvonne, time for you to, what's that?
Probably gonna tell me to buzz off, but what the heck, yeah. So.
Yvonne, time for you to unmute for a moment.
All righty.
All right, so here's what I've been wondering. Well, actually, I've been wondering a whole bunch of things through there. Starting with 1988's Diamonds Are a Dyke's Best Friend about lesbian softball, that was your first book. And then you followed it up with 3 books of poetry and 1 book of essays. Did you always want to write a novel?
I always did, but I never had a good enough idea of what I wanted it to be about. And so I had tried numerous times to start them, and it wasn't until whatever year it was I edited that archive in Signs with the story that is the bones of Infraction that I thought there was something really interesting there. And even though I would be away from it for years at a time because I was working full time at the time and other things were going on, left the career, started a new one, came back to the old one, etc. Every time I picked it up again, I was excited all over, and so I felt pretty confident that there was something there.
So what made you decide to write a Russian historical novel?
I actually spent about 6 months trying to convince myself that I could not do this. I was like, I don't know anything about Russian history. I don't speak Russian. There's no way I can write this novel. But I couldn't stop thinking about the story of these two women. And so then I spent another couple of years just doing research, just reading everything I could about Russian social and cultural history. And then I finally, after that time, jumped in and started writing. And it took a fair number of trials and errors before I figured out how to structure it all.
Well, interesting. And Gregg, I'm going to switch back to you next, but this other question kind of follows on that. So when you were doing the research, did you find like places and moments and the things that you were reading and you thought, oh, that would be really great in the book, and then you wrote it down on a card or on your computer or on your hand, I don't know where, and then try to figure out how to weave it into the story later? I was thinking about the one, there's a Christmas scene with the fair and the food and all of that. And when I was reading that, I wondered if that was distinctly something that you had read about that you thought, oh, this would be perfect. How did that go?
Yeah, I can't remember for sure where I got those particular bits from, but yeah, there were, I mean, I like food a lot, and so I I knew that I wanted to incorporate food into the book, and so every time I was reading anything, I would, make little note cards with the different kinds of foods, and I'm trying to think what else. A lot of the unusual phrases in the book are actually Russian proverbs.
Did you really just write all my questions for me? That is like one of the questions I have for you as well. So awesome.
Yeah, so, but in short, yes, I often made note of things that I thought were kind of cool, and then had to figure out how they would fit into the story.
Yeah, I actually made this note about, I called them metaphorical phrases because Proverbs did not come to my brain, but I wanted to know, like the one you wrote, once burned by milk, you could blow on, you blow on cold water. I loved that one. And I loved Not Married, Not Human by Aunt Lydia. And I wondered if that was real. So how many of them were real and how many of them did you make up?
Pretty much if they were odd like that, they were actual Russian proverbs.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them in there too. I loved all of them. So
yeah, it felt right to me to be able to, it gave it a more colloquial or personal feel to use things that they actually might have said.
Yeah, for sure. Gregg, I'm going to switch back to you for a minute, and then, but Yvonne, don't go anywhere. I have one more question for you. All right. This Coco's helping. Unmute Mr. Shapiro. Hello.
Hello.
So talk about your connection to place in your writing.
It's something that is in my prose and also in my poetry. And I think that in a way, it grounds me, instead of it's like some airy fairy, fairies are great, happy pride, but airy fairy, netherworld that I just don't dig it. So by giving myself, putting it in a place, then I'm hoping then to draw the readers to that place as well. I wish I was good at writing about a place I haven't been or whatever. Once in a while I'll throw in a name of a city but I mean, I'm basically an agoraphobic, so I haven't been that many places.
Well, I was thinking about some of the, some of the locations, especially ones in Chicago that I was familiar with. I like the Chicago suburb jokes; those were pretty amusing. And I was wondering, do those locations evoke ideas because of your life in Chicago? So you're driving down Howard and you're like, oh yeah, okay, this story about this guy who's going to pull over and all that stuff's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, this is all fiction. None of this is true. And so it's, it's about picking a location, picking an event, and you can't just drive down Howard. You have to talk about J.J. Fish and the fish keg. Well, there's a theme here, and the milk pail, and I mean, just it's insane. I mean, and there are in a lot of these places too. I'm realizing that so many of them. I mean, is Eduardo's Pizza even still on Howard Street? I mean, it's just so. In a way, it's like I feel like I'm, as a historian, I'm putting these places somewhere where if they don't exist anymore, that they're at least still in the story.
Little time capsule.
That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. What about your connection to music in your writing? I have to say one thing. I was when I was reading each of your books, I was making a bunch of notes and I was making them in my phone. I was writing them down on things. And when I went back to look at yours, Gregg, I found a list of quotes that I thought were, I don't know why I wrote them down. And the one that I put on this this piece of paper that I'm holding while I was making up these questions earlier today was, every song was declared our favorite and we danced to all of them. And then you read that story that had that quote in it. And I was like, what? So what about your connection to music and how does that appear in your writing?
Can't read it, can't play it, can't sing, but it is as central to my life as reading and writing and movies. Those are like the things that, if you take those things away from me, I will simply dissolve. So music, the way that I can make music is by incorporating it into my writing. It's cheating, I know, because I'm not a musician, but it's a way to make this music still sing to me and also to sing to the readers.
Well, music takes more than musicians to be music, right?
That's true. That is true, yes. Takes fans, yeah.
Right. Your other books are all poetry. What made you switch over into this short story?
Lincoln Avenue short stories too.
Right. Sorry, my bad.
I was constantly pulled back and forth when I first started writing. It was like, do I want to write fiction or write poetry? And eventually, I was in.
He's having some technical difficulties. Yvonne, I'm going to switch back to you and ask you your question while he's frozen there in Florida. Ready? So how did you decide to write in the third person, and then diary form, and then, oh, Gregg, you froze up, so we switched over to Yvonne for a minute, but I'll be back.
Oh, okay.
How did you decide to write in the third person and then in the diary format and then in the letters to represent the different characters?
That was part of the discovering how to write the book process. In part, I did both of the men as epistolary sections because I had read a bunch of letters that people like Tchaikovsky and I forget who else wrote, and there was a real kind of tenderness and floweriness to the letters that I really liked. And I was having a little trouble getting into the head of, these 19th century men, and that helped me a little to be able to put them in letter format. Initially, I had Maria also as a first-person character, but at some point, my wife Kathy was reading the book, and she would say, well, what does this refer to, or what does that mean? And I realized if Maria was talking in the first person, she couldn't explain these things because she already knew them. And so I had to go through the book and change all of the Maria chapters to third person. And so even as late as the editing process with Rattling Good Yarns, I'd occasionally find an I instead of a she or something. And early on, Lydia was also first person, and I probably one of my teachers, I don't remember now who said it, said that she sounded an awful lot like Maria, and so I had switched her to third person. Um, and I'm not quite sure why I decided Vera would be writing the journal, but I think it was a good way for her to be able to explore these feelings that were very new to her. And it really gives her an emotional outlet throughout the book as things unfold.
That's really awesome. Thanks. Because I was curious about it as I was reading through it. Gregg, I have one more question for you. Excuse me. Do you write by hand or do you write on your computer?
Wow. Oh, God, that's good. Well, it's okay. It took me a very long time because I was one of those people. It's like, well, it's flowing from my head through my arm. Lots of hair on this arm. I don't know how it got through to the pen, and then I was like, oh, F that. Can I say F that? F that. So I was like, no. So I just started, I would say, even almost as late as the early 90s, I was still writing stuff longhand. But then when I started writing prose, come on, I mean, that's just like, you're just asking for trouble. So, and I'm a really fast typer. So yes, it made sense, especially with prose. Poetry, I think poetry, right, Yvonne, you're a poet. There's something about writing a poem longhand versus on a computer, which I do exclusively now, by the way. But still, there was that experience of it's organic. It's all part of my, yeah. Okay.
So Yvonne, do you write your poetry by hand or on a computer?
For a long time, I resisted doing it on computer. I felt, I don't know, like a certain romance about writing it all out. And it gave me the ability to cross things out and draw arrows to when I was moving things around. And then at some point, it was like, it takes me so much longer than to just type it out. And so I switched to the computer, but I do miss the fact that that means often I don't have early drafts of poems because I just keep changing the document as I go along. So that's the downside to that. But yeah, I had started using the computer for prose long before I did for poetry because, as Gregg says, it's just faster.
Yeah, it makes sense too. So, especially if you're.
And I'm happy to gift you some of my OCD and say, just keep those drafts. They collect nicely. They stack up. Gifting it to you, yes.
Well, Gerber Heart has a lot of the things that I wrote on paper. A lot of it's really bad, and a lot of them reference women. I have no idea who they are. I'm like, who was I writing this emotional love poem to? I have no recollection who this person was.
Awesome. You didn't like write their initials in the corner. Kathy, you just go across them out of the corners. That's really interesting too. I think those are all the questions I have. So Jen, back to you.
Sure. Yeah, that was great. And please, if you have a question, just type it in, or if you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you too. I was going to say two things. One, Yvonne, I need to look through your collection more, because the thing I remember the most is the big manuscript of Diamonds Are Dyke's Best Friends. I was going to ask if the manuscript for Infraction would ever end up at Gerber Heart. That was my question.
I have multiple is what the word I was going for, multiple versions of it, and I think I've kept most of them. but they're not dated, so it's a little hard to tell what came when. But yeah, I'm happy to bring all of that in at some point. And you can see then how things evolved, how bad it was in the beginning, and how much better it is now.
Yeah, there's something about the handwriting. I'm a Luddite. I like handwriting. I can't, I'll type it up later, but even my thesis, I handwrote it page by page. But yeah, I mean, I guess, so Gregg, you talked about, so your next project. I don't know if you want to talk about how you both found Rattling Good Yarns Press, what that's been like, and then other projects that are coming up that you're thinking about down the line.
Sure. So I knew Suki, I knew Ian and Suki in Chicago. And then actually I actually thought that their press would be a good, because there was so much historical stuff, Suki's nonfiction and stuff. I thought, oh, this is a good press for Rick, for my husband Rick's memoir, Paper Cuts. I just thought that would be a really good fit. It just seemed well made for that press. And then there was another sort of stop and go kind of book project that unfortunately did not happen. And then I just had a very unpleasant experience with the original publisher of the 2016 edition of How to Whistle. He who shall remain nameless. And so I thought I like this book, and I've got some new stories, and what if we added those new stories to it and then gave this book a second chance? And that's how it came about.
And I was aware of Rattling Good Yarns Press. I knew Suki just a little bit in Chicago. We didn't pal around together or anything, but we knew who each other was. But I sort of, just from looking at the website, I kind of got the impression, oh, it's just, gay men. And I didn't really think anything more about it. Until Gregg suggested that I check them out. And so I sent them the manuscript, and they really loved it, which was incredible for me because it took so long to get this book published. People, different presses would say, well, we really like it, it's well written, but we don't know how to market it. So it was a frustrating thing to go through. So it was especially exciting when Ian and Suki said how much they, liked the manuscript and wanted to publish it.
I see we have our first question. Brett, let me see if I can unmute you. All right, let's see if that works. Are you able to unmute yourself? There we go. Perfect. Go ahead.
That did it. No question, just a comment to say that I'm very much looking forward to reading both of the books. And also that it's so nice to see some faces that I have not seen in quite a long time. So some of you more recently than others, but it's great to see everybody.
That's great. I actually, speaking of, having both Carrie and Brett, co-founders of People Like Us Books on, I wanted to ask Yvonne and Gregg, if you had any memories you wanted to share about your readings at People Like Us, and how, any things that stick out to you that you could share.
This is no reflection on the bookstore or Carrie and Brett, but I have a terrible memory, and I don't remember any specific things that we did there. I did go to that store a fair amount, and I remember really liking it, and I loved hanging out with Carrie and Brett when the opportunity arose, but I can't think of any specific events.
Carrie and I used to talk about this, and unfortunately, we really struggled with poets across the board, men, women, whatever the topic. Poetry's a tougher draw as a bookseller than other genres, and so I wouldn't be surprised if it was tied to poetry, and not seeing a large turnout would be my guess. But we always love seeing your smiling face there.
Well, I have to say two things. One is that my experience of doing poetry readings there, at least one or two, were through the roof. We had people. The picture that we posted of me and Maureen Seaton, I mean, I'm not even fit to polish Maureen's shoes. I mean, that's the goddess diva of all time. And to have been able to read with her, that was right after she had moved to Chicago from New York. So, and she was like winning all these awards. And so it was, other readings there, other poetry readings were well attended. I was happy. But I have to say that people like us were so important to me because I had just moved back to Chicago. I grew up in Chicago, but I had been living in Boston and DC, and then back to Boston again before moving to Chicago. And in Boston, we had Glad Day Books. And in DC, we had Lambda Rising. And then I thought to myself, I didn't really want to move back to Chicago. Like I was kicking and screaming because I didn't want to. And we moved back, and right away, I moved back in 1989, and shortly thereafter, or around that time, there was people like us. And I thought, this is going to save my life, because I moved from places where they had the amazing LGBTQ bookstores to a city that I thought was going to be a desert. And it was the opposite. It was the complete opposite. So thank you so much for doing that. And, I was just thinking, you guys should start a press called People Like Us Books. Oh, I didn't say, who said that? Coco, stop saying things. No, that's just.
Having a press and selling books are a little bit, different skill sets, but we could try. I have a comma problem, so somebody's going to have to help me.
But anyway, yeah, so thank you for the bookstore.
Yeah, we're excited. We'll probably be sharing more photos on Gerber Heart's Facebook and Instagram. We have some just great Polaroids from people like us that Carrie donated. So make sure to check those out. I think no one's typing in the chat, but if you have a question, just raise your hand. But yeah, can you both, Yvonne, I know Gregg, you talked a little earlier, but Yvonne, what's next? What's your next project that you're working on?
Well, I thought I was going to be starting a new novel. I actually got a little more comfortable with writing the longer fiction like that through the process of doing Infraction, and I had a basic rough story idea, and then right around the time that I was just beginning to work on that, I started having a variety of health issues, and that kind of put everything on hold. And then during that time, my new poetry book came out, and so I was busy promoting that. And then I signed the contract for Infraction, and so I was going through the editing process of that. So it just got really delayed, and I was trying to work my way back up into doing that. And I was talking to Kathy, and I were talking to my oncologist and telling her some story about some wacky technician along the way that we had met, and we have met a few. And she was laughing, and she said, "You should write a memoir." And suddenly I thought, maybe I should, because it was a really weird experience from beginning to end. So I started writing that. As I mentioned earlier, I have a really bad memory, and so I was having trouble remembering what things happened when during a particular long hospital stay. So I finally contacted them and got my medical records sent to me. So I'm gonna. I started the memoir, but I haven't gotten too far into it, and this should help me a little bit. Because I I was going to do the novel first, and then my wife was like, you should probably do the memoir first while you still remember some of this. So that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm working on.
And then Gregg, you said you're working on a new collection of short stories, right?
I am, and then without naming any name, so there's a pretty well-known lesbian writer from Chicago who has moved to DC, and she's got this press, and she asked me if I have a poetry manuscript, and I said, couple hundred, yeah, sure. Do you have the time? So no, I do have a couple, and so I'm going to talk to her hopefully in the next couple of weeks and see if she wants to do a new poetry manuscript as well.
That's great. Well, we look forward to seeing those come out. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I mean, feel free. Otherwise, I mean, thank you to Carrie and Gregg and Yvonne. Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you all of you for coming. See you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Have a good night.